Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to completely demystify the complex mechanics of what actually happens after a legal agreement gets signed. Look, we all know how to make a deal, right? But what happens when that deal goes entirely sour, or maybe needs a major overhaul, or finally just reaches the end of its life? Well, that's exactly the life cycle we're mapping out today.
Everything we're unpacking today comes directly from our source material, Commercial Law, Fresh Perspectives. We're going to focus specifically on chapters 11, 12, and 13, pulling out the absolute key takeaways to give you a highly structured breakdown of contract law in action.
Okay, here is our mental roadmap. 1. When contracts break down. 2. Fixing a broken deal. 3. Changing or transferring contracts. And 4. How contracts end.
Let's start with Section 1. When contracts break down, the reality of unfulfilled promises.
So, establishing the stakes when someone flakes on a deal. In legal terms, a breach of contract isn't always just someone completely walking away. Often, it comes down to the precise way they failed to perform. Typically, it happens in one of two ways. On one hand, you've got lateness, known legally as mora. Think of missing a critical deadline, like a company completely failing to process your visa before your non-refundable flight takes off. On the other hand, we have malperformance. This is when the action is technically done, but it's totally substandard or defective. Imagine hiring a security company to provide guards for a massive stadium event, and they only send 2 people. That is classic malperformance.
Section 2. Fixing a broken deal. Navigating legal remedies.
The law absolutely does not just leave you stranded when a promise is broken. It gives you very specific tools to make things right, and there is a clear step-by-step hierarchy here. Step 1 is specific performance, which is literally asking the court to force the defaulting party to do exactly what they originally promised. If that's just not possible, you move to Step 2, cancellation. This completely rescinds the agreement and gets the innocent party off the hook for their duties. And finally, Step 3 is damages, where you seek financial compensation for the loss you actually suffered.
Okay, so that brings up a really crucial point. If you do opt for damages, what are you actually entitled to? Because you can't just throw out some random massive number just because you're angry. You have to prove precisely what you lost. To make this super tangible, let's look at Juan de Sale from our source material. He bought 1,000 live chickens from a seller, and his plan was to resell them to a supermarket at a profit of 5 Rand per chicken. He explained this exact plan to the seller right from the start. Well, the seller breached the contract and failed to deliver. Juan de Sale wasn't just entitled to get his original money back. Because both sides knew about that specific resale plan beforehand, Juan de Sale was legally entitled to claim exactly 5,000 Rand in damages for that specific lost profit.
Let's move to Section 3. Changing or transferring contracts. Pivoting the original agreement.
What if you don't want to fight in court, but you just want to change the deal or hand your duties off to someone else? Contracts are actually pretty flexible, but before you transfer anything, you have to know your own liability, especially if you signed with other people. Joint liability means you only pay your pro rata share. Say you and a roommate rent a place for 4,000 Rand. You're only on the hook for your 2,000. But if the contract says joint and several liability, that is a massive difference. That means the landlord can legally force just you to pay the entire 4,000 Rand debt if your roommate flakes.
So once you know where you stand, how do you actually move the pieces around? Well, if you want to transfer your rights to someone else, you use a process called secession. A great everyday example of this is a landlord telling a tenant to pay their monthly rent directly into the landlord's bank account to pay off a loan instead of paying the landlord directly. The right to receive that money has been ceded. Now, what's really fascinating is the flip side of that. Transferring your duties, like owing money or providing a service, requires a process called delegation. And unlike secession, delegation is a tripartite agreement. All 3 parties, the original debtor, the new debtor, and the creditor, have to agree to it. You literally can't just unilaterally decide someone else is going to pay your rent for you. Everyone has to be on board. What if you're passing the baton entirely? Transferring both your rights and your duties all at once is legally called assignment. Think of a brand new tenant taking over your lease completely. They get the right to live there, and they take on the duty to pay the rent. The old tenant steps out of the picture entirely. But sometimes the parties involved stay exactly the same. It's just the agreement itself that needs a total rewrite. When parties replace their old duty with a brand new one to resolve an issue, the law calls that novation. The original agreement is terminated, and a fresh one simply takes its place.
Alternatively, if things are getting really contentious, the parties might reach a compromise. Honestly, this is a much friendlier and way cheaper way to settle disputes rather than fighting it out in court. Say two people are fiercely arguing over whether a debt is 100,000 Rand or not. They might compromise and agree to settle the matter right then and there for a lump sum of 75,000. It effectively ends the old dispute by creating a brand new, agreed-upon reality.
And that perfectly tees up Section 4. How contracts end. The definitive termination of rights and duties.
How does a contract actually die? Let's start with a really wild scenario. Ask yourself, what happens when a massive event, totally out of your control, completely derails your ability to do what you legally promised to do?
The law calls this supervening impossibility. In this case from 1919 illustrates it perfectly. Picture this. A German company called Peters, Flaman & Co. had a contract to provide street lighting for the Kokstad municipality in South Africa. But then, World War I broke out. The South African government passed a law forbidding German companies from doing business. It became literally legally impossible for them to fulfill the contract. The court ruled that this supervening impossibility automatically terminated the rights and obligations of the agreement. Nobody was at fault. The contract simply ended.
Now, aside from massive historical events making things impossible, contracts usually end the boring way, through proper performance, meaning everyone just does exactly what they promised. But they can also end through prescription, which is when a debt just expires after a certain amount of time, or through death, or insolvency. But let's look at two of the cleverest legal mechanisms on this list: set-off and merger.
Set-off is a genuinely brilliant everyday tool. Think of it like this. If you owe a friend 200 Rand for a movie ticket, but later on they borrow 100 Rand from you at an ATM, you don't need to hand each other separate piles of cash. You apply set-off and simply pay them the 100 Rand difference. Legally, the debts cancel each other out to the extent of the smaller amount. It's so efficient.
And merger is equally fascinating. This happens when legal roles combine into one single person. For instance, if you're renting an apartment and then you somehow buy that exact same apartment from your landlord, you suddenly become both the owner and the tenant. Because it is legal nonsense to owe yourself rent, the capacities of debtor and creditor merge, and the lease agreement automatically terminates.
We've covered a ton of ground today, navigating from a contract breaking down to how we fix it, bend it, and finally terminate it. So after exploring all these mechanics, I want to leave you with a provocative thought to chew on. Does an agreement truly end the second someone breaks their promise to you? Or does that agreement actually survive, just hovering in the background, until you actively choose to use these legal tools to definitively terminate it? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope it gave you a completely fresh perspective on the life cycle of a contract.